because development it's a numbers game in a sense that you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the one, but we can't have a lot of development deals going at one time. So we take a little more, targeted approach when it comes to that. But I would say that's where most of our properties have come from is relationships or
That makes sense. And in relationships, no matter what aspect of real estate you're doing, relationship is about the most important thing.
100%. I actually say a lot. We're actually in the relationship business, right? I mean, yes, we build real estate and all those things, but especially with development and having to put teams in place for kind of every aspect of the development cycle, you're relationship driven and people have to want to work with you.
So in today's show, we're going to dive into the details about how to buy land and then walk through the development process. Now, it's a very complicated process. There's lots of moving parts and also lots of people involved. So I have Adam Fenton from Narrate Holdings here to kind of give us the 40,000 foot view on how he quarterbacks the whole process, different moving pieces, the different parts, because he said oftentimes people are great at what they do, but don't understand what their role is in the bigger picture. So Adam is here to walk me and run through the entire process. Welcome back, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here again.
I am really excited to kind of get this like global view on here because as we've talked deals, we've gone out to lunch, I've gotten snippets and just, things going on and always in like a bite-sized piece here.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for my own education and a lot of our investors, listeners as well, like trying to understand, hey, from A to Z, how does the process work?
Yep. No, happy to walk through it today, and we're really going to focus today on how to buy a piece of land and what does that consist of. And that's, it's probably one of 10 things that really goes into a multifamily development. And in my opinion, development is the hardest thing there is to do within real estate. And maybe apartments are the hardest because you are building homes for people, right? It's not an office building. It's not self-storage, right? You're creating homes. So this is just the first step in that process, and we'll walk through that today. And I'm assuming in some upcoming episodes we'll probably just take it to the next step then. And then I think the goal at the end of the day would be to have a podcast for kind of each step in the development process. So listeners out there and anyone else interested kind of understands what does that look like, from start to finish, from the first time you look at a piece of land until you have residents moving into the building and you're stabilized. You're looking at a probably 4 to 5 year process.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. We have some slides on here that we're using to guide through.
Yep.
So as Adam said, we'll be doing a deeper dive in each subject, which I'm excited about. So Adam, where do we start? We want to buy land. What's the first thing?
We buy land, and how do you have to find it, right? How do you find land? And quite frankly, when I started Narrate about 5 years ago now, that was probably one of the biggest things I was worried about throughout the process was how am I going to get deal flow? And what I would say is once you are in the development business and your name is out there a little bit and people know that you're active, we're turning deals away at this point in time because we don't have capacity to do them. Obviously, different environment today as well. But there are many different ways to actually find the piece of land. Number one is brokers. There are land brokers out there, and that is their sole job is to work with landowners and then essentially market the property for sale to would-be potential developers. We've bought a handful from brokers, but we tend to not buy a lot from brokers. We tend to do more off-market stuff. Usually, if it's marketed, it's too expensive for us.
So when you say don't buy from brokers, do you mean like brokers bring in publishing deals through LoopNet or brokers like with a pocket listing and they're doing their whisper campaign?
More so the first.
Okay.
We've done some whisper stuff, and it's all about creating relationships with brokers as well. So I think that's where we have been successful is we have relationships with those brokers who do get the pocket listing. And they know, hey, like this is kind of the area they like. This is the type of size or the size of project they'd be interested in. So we've built, I think, a really good reputation with that. And we always do what we say we're going to do. I think we've only dropped the land on 1 or 2 deals we've had under contract, and those were both during COVID when we didn't know what was going to happen in the world. So
to be clear, you're saying a lot of the off-market deals, those are still deals that brokers bring to you, but they're just not publicly marketed.
They're not publicly marketed. Yep. They'll go to a list of 2, 3, 4, 5 guys and see if there's any interest there. And then if there isn't, then they would typically go to the full market. And usually by then, our cost of capital to compete against the bigger guys is higher, so we can't pay quite as much.
Okay. So you got brokers. What other?
We got brokers, RFPs. So that's a request for proposals. So a lot of times that will come from some sort of government institution or, a company owns a piece of land, but they're not real estate. It's not a real estate company. So they'll send it out to a handful of developers. And then you basically put together a package of why you should be the qualified person to buy this land. We've competed in a couple. We've never gotten them. But it's definitely something that is out there and fairly prevalent. The next would be direct calls. So if we like a piece of dirt, we think that it's a good opportunity to be a development site, we'll just try to find out who the owner is and call on them directly.
Now, I'm going to relate this to a lot of people know like fix and flippers and small residential motivated sellers. Do you have like a team of people just cold calling all the time, or is it more just, hey, there's 1 or 2 sites really like, and then you dig in with the scalpel?
Yep, okay. Latter of the two. Just because development it's a numbers game in a sense that you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the one, but you can't have 100 development deals going. Well, we can't have 100 development deals going at one time. So we take a little more targeted approach when it comes to that.
Okay, that makes sense.
The next is going to be referrals, and social capital plays into that a little bit as well. So referrals is just, hey, my grandma owns a piece of land and I heard that you're a real estate developer. Would you have any interest in potentially developing this land? And it comes referrals through brokers as well. We had one recently that we were working on. There's a gentleman that we had a relationship with, and his good friend of his just inherited a bunch of real estate and had no idea what to do with it. So they had some good development parcels within the portfolio. So we worked with him on that. Unfortunately, it's in a neighborhood where you can't tear any buildings down. Which we put a lot of work in and then found that out. So there was no chance of redeveloping, but that would be something like that. And then social capital is, I tend to that, great relationships, always doing the right thing. And if someone knows that if they work with you, you're going to be treated fairly. We're going to shoot you straight, and we're going to be right to the point. So we don't spend time on something unless we're very serious about it.
So out of these 5 buckets for creating deal flow, like kind of what % roughly does each flow, or what's the 80-20 rule? Yeah,
the 80-20 rule here is going to be brokers. But more pocket listing.
So off-market broker.
Yep, off-market. Yep. So it's going to be brokers and then referrals. Those are where the two mostly come from. We've not been real successful in RFPs, and usually on the direct calls, they've been called by every broker in town. So, but I will say some people more enjoy working directly with a client than a broker as well. So it's kind of hit or miss, but I would say that's where most of our properties have come from is relationships or brokers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And relationships, no matter what aspect of real estate you're doing, relationship is about the most important thing.
100%. I actually say a lot. We're actually in the relationship business, right? I mean, yes, we build real estate and all those things, but especially with development and having to put teams in place for kind of every aspect of the development cycle, you're relationship driven and people have to want to work with you. So now we go to the next slide here, and now we've found it. Now what do we do? So one thing we try to do is move quickly. Time kills deals. So once we find something that is in a neighborhood we like, it's got demand generators already in place, we'll dig into the zoning right away. That's very key. So zoning, basically every piece of dirt, probably in the U.S. for the most part, has a zoning that goes with it, definitely throughout Colorado. So if you buy a piece of land or you buy a building, it is going to tell you what essentially you can build and on that site and the requirements and some of the things that you're going to have to do from a design perspective. It's also going to tell you what type of product you can build. Sometimes you can build multifamily but not office. Sometimes you can only build commercial, no multifamily. Sometimes it's going to be single family, no commercial at all. So every parcel is a little bit different. It's really important to understand what that zoning is, because the zoning of that site's ultimately going to drive the price that you can pay for that piece of land.
Okay.
So for example, you could have two pieces of dirt that are the same exact size. Let's say each side is 12,500 square feet. One site you can build 3 stories on. The other site you can build 15 stories on. The 15-story site is going to be worth a lot more because you can fit a lot more density above it.
That makes sense.
So that's a real crux there. That you want to understand what that is. Then depending on the location and where the site is, you want to decide what product type you're going to build. We tend to just focus for the most part on multifamily or, residences. That's kind of our sole focus. We don't do office. We do one hotel, but not probably many more. So we're strictly focused on multifamily. But within multifamily, there's different products you can build as well. Are we doing 3-story garden walk up where it's surface parked where you need some acreage? Or are we building a podium? Are we building a podium deal where our parking's underground? Or are we building a podium deal where our parking's above grade? So zoning, that ties back into the zoning as well. So if the shorter zoning you have, most likely you're probably going to go underground with your parking. Because
when you say short, you mean height restriction?
Height restriction, right? So, you're 3-5 stories, you're most likely, and it's an urban environment, you're most likely going underground with your parking because you need as much revenue generating real estate above as you possibly can have. Now, if you get into 8, 12 story type stuff, maybe you can go up with your parking, which is a lot less expensive. And density isn't quite as big of an issue to maximize density on the site.
Okay. So one of the things I hear, going back to you have the 2 same lots, I hear people all the time, hey, well, what's the potential to rezone it?
Yep.
And I know that's a very loaded question because the rezoning process, which I've never gone through, but
Yep.
just, being around people that do it, is it's a long time and you usually don't know if you can rezone it before you're going to close on the property.
That's right. Yeah.
So is that just a roll of the dice?
That is a roll of the dice. And now, so there are some groups out there who they love that, and they can structure a deal in such a way that they can, they're going to spend some money going through the rezoning effort, but they're probably not closing on the land unless they feel very, very confident about it. We typically will not buy anything that needs a rezone. We went through a variance process for a deal we had in Rhino, and it was absolute misery. And we ultimately did. It was really silly, but we didn't get it. And it was a waste of 12 months going through that process, and it ended up hurting us a little bit in the end. So we will not buy anything where we have to have a rezone for the deal to make sense.
Okay.
We're working on a couple projects right now that we are going through a rezoning, but it makes a lot of sense too. And if we don't get it, it's not going to crush the deal. We've got some lost time and a little lost money in that effort, but ultimately the deal will still work in some shape or form.
Makes sense.
Yep. So the next thing we're looking at here is you want to look at your land sale comps. Right, you want to make sure that what you're paying for the dirt is in line with what everyone else has, or your cost basis can be a lot higher than everyone else's. And once you do this enough, once you understand the zoning and you understand where it's located, we know pretty quickly like what you can pay here and what the comps are. We're tracking comps a lot, so that's one of the abilities to be able to move fast. Is once you do this so much, we can look at a potential piece of land and within about 30 seconds decide, is this something that's worth pursuing further, or let's just drop it and not spend any time on it.
Just that quick of a
Just that quick. Yeah. And now
that's just for the muscle memory.
That's just muscle memory and doing it so many times. Now I will say it's a little bit different in today's environment because, just with you got, interest rates which are throwing things a little wacky right now. And then you have Denver's affordable housing thing, which has made some land worth like nothing.
That big of an impact?
That big of an impact. Yeah.
Wow.
It's impactful. And they don't know, you have politicians, creating policy and have no idea what that impact actually is. And we're going to see what that impact is in about 4 years, when rents, in my opinion, are going to go through the roof here.
Yeah.
Just a limited supply. But anyway, I'd say in today's environment, it's not quite as black and white, but there for a while. Yeah. We knew what everyone was buying for. I mean, our first deal we bought, was 1250 South Pearl, Aston. It's called the Aston in Platt Park. We had an LOI and we didn't even underwrite the deal. We knew what other stuff for 5-story door in inferior locations was trading for throughout town. So we had an offer in the next day. Didn't even underwrite it. Yeah. We just knew what the pricing was, and that was a pocket listing, that we got there. And ultimately, we bought it and developed it. And as, it's a really good addition to the neighborhood and fairly successful deal. So now that we're through all that, then you call your architect. And we've
So
got
even before you're putting the offer in?
you usually before you put the offer in, I'd say it's always a little bit. It's not black and white. Sometimes like the I just described to you, we knew it was a great deal, so we got the offer in and wanted to move quick because we knew there'd be a lot of competition for it. And that's in today's environment, you don't have to move quite as quick as we used to have to. But we were buying land before we really knew what we could build on it, like going through the whole process with the city and things. So the reason you want to call your architect is really to understand, yes, we understand zoning, but they're the ones that we call it the yellow jello. They mass it out, basically.
You call it the what?
Yellow jello.
Yellow jello.
Yellow jello. So it's basically what they're doing is they're just taking a very high level approach saying, okay, from a building envelope standpoint, here's what you can do. Here is kind of what your parking is going to look like. Here is your gross square footage. Here's your net square footage. And it's very high level underwriting at that point in time. And you want to make sure you're within at least spitting distance of what you think you can do there. But the reason it's important to have your architect involved is I've seen developers do this where they think that they can maximize every square foot of the site. Well, that's not always true. You might be next to a historical designation where you have to set your building back off the alley, once it gets up 20 feet, or you think you've designed this great building and you have 60-foot deep units. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't rent. So it's a little different from product type standpoint where you can't just kind of rubber stamp it and move on to the next. Every site is unique and different. And you have to have them, in conjunction with you help understand what that looks like.
Okay.
So, and that goes back to kind of that social capital, right? We've got an architect that we work with, Oz Architecture. They're a great partner of ours. Probably done 90% of our deals that we've done. And we just have a great back and forth relationship where I can call them and, we talk through it. And within 2 to 3 days, I'll have a massing diagram where some groups are going to charge you for it. Some people want to charge you $5,000, for every deal you look at. And it's just not sustainable, as a smaller company.
But since you do deals with them, they're probably happy to do as part of the relationship, right?
Yeah, they do as part of the relationship. And I just tell them, look, I know I'm probably paying for it. I just want to feel like I'm getting something for free. So, all right. So now we kind of move on. All right. We have a deal, and we get it back from our architect. Now what do we do? All right. Well, now we need to do an initial underwriting on this, and we're not getting into the nitty gritty details on it at this point in time. We just need to make sure that this thing at least somewhat makes some sense. So we're going to drop that into our pro forma, and that's just like that's another thing, right? Enough reps in the seat, you kind of know what assumptions to put in from a high level perspective.
What are the key assumptions you plug in there?
Your key assumption is going to be your unit mix. Your unit mix. So how many units do you have? How big are they? And what are the rents? So unit mix, rents, expenses
for
like operating expenses. Yep.
Once it's built.
Yep. Once it's built, and then your hard costs.
Okay.
Your hard costs are usually 70 to 75% of your overall cost on a project. So it's really important to understand what that is. So we'll do, and we've built enough that we generally know what different product types will cost to build depending on the level of finish you want to take it to. But you still want to do that initial underwriting. And then what I'll do is I'll identify, we have some great general contractor relationships as well. So what I'll do is, depending on, is it a large project or a smaller project, I'll reach out to a GC and ask for some high level concept pricing. I don't want you to spend, don't go to the market in the subcontractor market, but let's look at our high level assumptions here. They're doing it almost like we are, right? Very high level at that standpoint in time, but it's like, okay, we need to make sure that our costs are somewhat in line with where we thought they were.
Yeah.
So usually within a week, you can get that feedback back. So what we'll do is we'll send a little bit of a narrative of, hey, here's what we want on the exterior of the building. Here's what the plan for, from an interior finish perspective. Here's what the plan for.
Is that like the architect yellow jello type?
Yeah, it's very, very similar, but it's more it's just a Word document basically that we've kind of built out actually. So we kind of, we've got a couple of them. One is for a little bit higher end product. One is for kind of more mid-tier product. And a lot of it comes down to like mechanical systems, stuff like that. So the mechanical systems will drive your hard costs in a building in a pretty big way.
I want to just jump back to, you're talking about the initial underwriting, because you said the unit mix, rents, expenses, hard cost is, and maybe I'm assuming, hey, you have the rents, the expenses, you can figure out your NOI. Is that what you're doing? You figure out the ultimate takeout price?
Yep.
Okay.
So you put your NOI, your NOI, your soft costs, and your hard costs. Those are your three things. Financing can affect a little bit, but not hugely. We really kind of know where that shakes out, and it it's changed a lot recently, but for a long time it didn't change much. But yeah, those are your kind of key assumptions. Those are the levers you pull.
Okay.
Essentially at the end of the day.
Right.
Yep. So once we get that, once we get that back from the GC, then we put it in a detailed underwriting. So we've already done our high level initial underwriting. So to get to a detailed underwriting, it's another hour, a couple hours probably on it. It's not rocket science. Some people like to really make it more difficult than it needs to be, but it's really not. So we'll kind of drop in some detailed underwriting. And if we feel that, it's something that we want to pursue and we have the capacity to pursue it, and that we be able to raise capital to build this, later on when we're ready to go vertical, we'll make an offer at that point in time. Typically, and I would say this is a typical process, right? Like if we see something that's just a home run, right, we're writing an offer right away, and then we'll go through these steps later.
Okay. And so what's the typical, like, not like the no-brainer Aston deal, but your typical, is this a week long,
I'd say a week to 2 weeks, depending on, it's really dependent upon how quickly the architect can get back to us and how quickly the general contractor can get back to us.
Okay.
Those are really the two linchpins in it. And what you don't want to do is make assumptions, make an offer, get it under contract, and you're like, oh shit, I really missed the boat here, and now I've spent money on this thing at this point in time, and I spent money, and now I have to we have to walk away from it.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be the first time that we've walked away from, like I mentioned, a couple deals where we had some sunk costs in legal and environmental, but you try to avoid that.
Well, part of that too is then, like, hey, the brokers, they want to bring the deals to people that are not just close contract, but close.
Yep.
So if you fall out a lot of times, you probably stop seeing deal flow.
Yep. That's right. That's exactly right. You nailed it. So now we're kind of on to the next step. And sometimes you'll have an old school land seller who doesn't want to do an LOI and they just want to go straight to a contract. We prefer to send a letter of intent or LOI, and that essentially lays out, here's what the property is, right? Here's the legal description. Here is where, the address of it, all of those things. You're going to have who the buyer and seller are. And then when I think one important note, actually this is probably more important for the PSA, but an LOI is a short version of the PSA. And we like to hammer out all the major details in the LOI.
PSA?
Purchase and sale agreement.
Okay.
Yep. So a letter of intent. This is not legally binding. You can get out of this. We do like to write in our LOIs that once it's signed, they cannot solicit other developers or go under contract with someone else. We want that grace period to get a contract in place.
How long is that grace period?
It depends on who your seller is. If it's a less sophisticated seller, you're probably using a Colorado state form. Doesn't cover a whole lot, but you can get through that that's a week.
Is that different than the Colorado real estate to buy and sell contract?
Just very similar. It's just for land.
Okay.
Yep.
But the land version of that.
Yeah, the land version of that. Or if you get a sophisticated investor, then you have to get attorneys involved. It's it could be a 30 to 40 page legal document. So it's really dependent. We've gone both ways. I probably prefer the state form just because we're not editing it. When you start going back and forth, you get into negotiations, and it can be heavily favored to the buyer or the seller, whoever drafted it. So I prefer to use the state form. It's just a lot easier, I think. But every seller is different. So we usually take the lead from the seller typically when we're buying a piece of dirt. So then we go, so then we get into a price, right? Tells you what the price is. Then, this works, earnest money. So you have to do an earnest money deposit always. So what that is, it's just like buying a house or anything else. You put a certain amount of money up, that goes into escrow with the title company. And, that essentially it's refundable up to a certain point in time. So that's your due diligence time frame typically. So you want time to go through your due diligence to make sure that everything that you're buying here. You're going through you're going through your legal review, and we'll get into some of this detail here in just a second. But you that lays that out, and then your closing time frame. So once you get through your due diligence, your money goes non-refundable. How long after that do I have to close?
So the LOI is really just to kind of like from a high level, make sure buyer and seller are on the same page,
Yep.
and essentially lay out the
It's
terms for the contract.
It's the framework of the contract. Yep,
Okay.
You nailed it. Yep. So then once you're through that, you sign that. Now we're on to the purchase and sale agreement, or the PSA. So this, as I was mentioning, is a detailed document. And depending on, whether you're a state form or legal, a lawyer negotiated form, I guess is what I would call it. It's got all of the details of the transaction within there. Another thing, so this is where you really want to make sure that get your attorney involved to look at your title work. You want to make sure that what you think you're actually buying is actually what you're buying.
Yes.
Right. This is, and I think I go into some due diligence here in a second, what we do during the due diligence process. The other thing that I always do during this is make sure that we get a certificate of non-historic designation. I will never go non-refundable without having that.
Who issues the certificate?
It's the city. I think it's the historical. I don't know exactly where it comes from. The city. I think it's from their historic division down there. But there's been some folks recently have gotten screwed real bad by the historic designation on properties that
they didn't realize that it was one and never.
Well, so it's interesting. We could talk about this in a whole separate podcast, but one of the challenges, people are using historic designations as an anti-development tool now. So if you like you don't even have to you live in California and you decide that you like a property here in Denver and that you'd like to put a historic designation on it, you pay $700 and you try to put a historic designation on it. You don't have to own it.
Simple?
It's that simple. Yep. And then it goes to the board and they decide if it should have a historic designation or not. Now they're stretching like historic architects and historic people. Like it's frustrating, right? Tom's Diner was a perfect example, one of the ugliest buildings in town. And they, some bartender down the street decided that he liked the building and put a historic designation on it, and he was going to sell it and sell off in the sunset. And now he's stuck with a shitty old building.
Funny.
It's crazy, but that's, we continue to lean more and more that direct, liberal as which look, they're, and I'm not anti historic designation, but they're just using it as an anti-development tool now. And that's when I have an issue.
Well, that's smart though, from your end, as wearing as the developer hat and a fiduciary for your investors.
Right. We will never take that risk.
I did not realize you could get a certificate, what you call a certificate of
certificate of non-historic designation.
Okay.
Yep. So it costs about $700 to get one of those as well. So you got to go through and, they make you jump through every hoop there is now. But you got to take, a picture of every crevice in the building and send it in, and hopefully they come back. And if they decide that there is any sort of historic designation, then it goes through a 21-day process where then the neighborhood can comment on it. And it's, I think they need to overhaul it a little bit, but I'm for keeping historic structures, but as an anti-tool, like, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, and most important, you just want to know, like, hey, can I do the business plan you originally intended to without a major curveball that's going to blow up the deal? We
were looking at building a deal over near Cheeseman Park. I can't remember the exact neighborhood it was in. So it was basically over off 6th Avenue, right next to Angelo's there.
Okay.
The buildings are literally falling down at this point in time.
Over there.
And I was working with a landowner, building owner there, and we went, started down this process, and we are going to look for a little bit of rezoning because it didn't quite make sense what was in place. And then we're like, okay, like let's make sure we can tear these buildings down. Well, it turns out anything in that entire neighborhood, they did a zoning overlay back in the 1970s. That basically every single building is a contributing structure, meaning you can't tear it down. And they didn't want to become Cherry Creek. And this is in the 70s. Well, look at Cherry Creek now. So, there's some quirky things about development and throughout the city. So it's,
I drive by, that's fascinating.
Sorry, Alamo Placida neighborhood. That's it. You can't, you want to know why I haven't seen any development there is because you can't. You can't tear anything down. They would prefer you to try to reuse existing crumbling structures.
Okay. That's
So
fascinating to learn.
we'll get back on topic here.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But
no,
that's a very important thing to talk about because
No question.
I've heard many horror stories from
yeah.
especially around like Old Town Littleton. I've had a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
people
you
get
go
snagged and
Oh yeah,
deals like down there.
Yeah, if you don't do it and do your research on it, you think you're going to be able to build this beautiful new building, then all of a sudden you have grossly overpaid for an existing structure that you can't do anything with.
Okay, so you get the certificate of non-historical designation.
Yep. And we will do that before we go non-refundable. And then what I always like to do here too is make sure that, and it's always a little bit different with timeframes and stuff, but I always make sure that we can do an SDP submittal while we're under contract, whether it's during due diligence or after that, whatever it is.
Explain what it is.
Yeah. So an SDP is a site development plan, and it is something that you have to submit to the city, and it's different than a permit. So there's essentially there's two things you have to do with the city in order to build a new building. One is your site development plan, and that's one process, and then completely separate process is your permitting. So your site development plan is going to go first, but essentially this is looking at your setbacks, your build to lines, your civil, a lot of your civil stuff, transportation, wastewater. How are you handling all of those things on the site? And we got ourselves in a situation once where we want to make sure, generally speaking, that we know we can build what we think we can build. And that's what the site development plan is gonna tell us. We got in a situation once where the landowner actually had previously submitted a site development plan. But he quickly realized that he wasn't capable of developing something like this and wanted to sell it. So we ended up getting under contract, and we wanted to submit this site development plan to make sure what we wanted to build, we could build. Well, he didn't want to do that because once ours got submitted, it kicked his out of line. So if we wouldn't have closed, then he would have had to kind of start the process all over again. So we always want to make sure that we can submit. So we ultimately ended up not submitting it. We ended up buying the deal and still built a great deal there, but there was a little heartache there for a little bit of not having that comfort.
Okay.
So that's, and it's very high conceptually, it doesn't take a lot of time or money it's usually your civil and architect to put it together. Fairly quick document. We generally want to understand what we can build here and that our assumptions are correct.
So how do you balance speed and due diligence like this?
It's a good question. I think in a hot market, you spend a lot of hours, to be quite honest, right? You have a lot of hours, and it goes back to that social capital, having teams ready to go. So, what we always try to do is we will tee our entire team up that we think is appropriate team to work on it, saying, hey, this is coming. And then once we do get it under contract, then you kind of put the pedal to the metal.
Okay.
And really understand that. And what I would say too, Chris, is, right here, I wrote actually, this is actually not correct. Usually it takes about 30 days to negotiate a fully attorney PSA. The other one, as I mentioned, could be 7 days to 10 days, but usually we'll try to draw that out just a little bit to get our team in place.
Okay.
Like I was just mentioning. So we will try to draw it out a little bit about that at that point in time. And then it's contractually binding, right? So if we don't perform on what we say we're going to do, most notably put our earnest money up. So usually you're putting that earnest money up within the first 3 to 5 business days of going under contract. If you don't get the money up, then the contract falls apart. If we don't close the contract, we're in default of the contract. So
at some point you can lose your earnest money as well.
Yep. And you can do, so if you get through your due diligence period and you don't close within the time frame you're supposed to close, then you lose that earnest money. And depending on the size of the deal, we've gone, I think, as low as 25,000, but we've had some that have been much, much, much larger than that, where it hurts. It's going to hurt bad if you don't close.
I think I'm probably jumping the gun there on the hard earnest money, because that probably goes into more of the DD stuff. So if I'm leading you, you can take control and tell me.
Nope. So now we're under contract. Okay. Now we've signed the contract, and we've kind of been jumping around a little bit here. But once you're under contract, these are essentially the things that we're focused on. So due diligence, That's really understanding, the market, the underwriting, the costs. That's really kind of your development pro forma. Okay. So when I say due diligence, that's what I mean by that. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing the title review. So we have our attorney do the title review. And then if the title isn't clean or you have some issues with it, you actually do an objection, title objection. So all of these dates are laid out, in the contract that, okay, title company has to get you title within 7 days. Then you have 3 days to object. So all of these things are laid out in the purchase and sale agreement. We do a survey as well. If there is a survey already, we will usually rely upon that. If there's not, we have to go get a survey. You have to jump on that pretty quick. There for a while when things were hot, it could be 30 days, 45 days before you can get a survey back. So in that scenario, you do something less. You do like a ISP, which I actually don't know what that stands for. But it's a shorter version of
I know
of
what
a
you
survey.
mean. Yeah.
So you want to make sure that there's nothing crazy, that kind of linked with title, making sure that, there's no easements that might throw the deal into disarray, that you're buying what you think you're buying. We actually found during title search for one of our projects down in Colorado Springs that there was no alcohol sales allowed on the site that went back to Prohibition era. Right. So if we wouldn't have got that cleaned up, technically we could have never had a restaurant or bar that served alcohol on site. So just little things like that you just want to, dot your I's and cross your T's.
Yeah.
During the same process, we'll do an environmental check, so that they're coming out, and environmental companies making sure that everything, they're looking at the history of the site of what are the previous uses and all of those things. And then that's called a phase one, environmental phase one. So we do that every single time, making sure that we're not buying a contaminated site. Then we're also, if they look at it and say, hey, there's maybe, there was a dry cleaner upstream or something like that, they might recommend a phase two. And that's where they're actually, when they're doing the phase two, they're actually going out, drilling, doing multiple different borings from across the site and then taking it back and testing in the lab to see what that ultimately looks like. Geotech. So this is geotechnical services, or soil reports. So this is doing soil tests to ensure that, you have good dirt there. You might have bedrock, all kinds of different things, which could, in turn, determine the type of a structure you're going to build here. And then the last is asbestos. So when we have asbestos, that's goes back to the 1970s, and if you have the really friable stuff, it can be a lot of money to abate, millions of dollars potentially. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything behind the bones. And this is tricky to do though, because you really don't understand until you do destructive testing what's behind the walls. So we'll typically try to pop our head up into ceiling rafters, and look at some of the pipe coatings and things like that, ceiling materials. We're actually not doing the testing; it's more a visual inspection. We've got a group that's great.
And they usually know what materials.
Exactly. Yep.
Right?
They know what they're looking for. I say we, it's really our team. That's our environmental team that's out there doing that. So that's really what happens during the due diligence process. So
is that where is that usually end of due diligence? Is that where the earnest money goes hard?
Yep.
Or non-refundable?
Yep. And then so once we're at the kind of end of due diligence, we might try to get our concept SDP. So some of these things actually overlap a little bit. Due diligence and after due diligence.
Yeah.
So we talked about the concept SDP submittal. We always want to be able to do that. We have to make sure that before we get to the end of due diligence, we've got our non-historic designation. We want to make sure that we have a good concept development that we understand, that we've verified the hard costs. Typically, sometimes we'll do it with multiple contractors just to make sure that we're in line there. And then this is also at the time when we start building out detailed soft cost budgets, right? How much are we going to spend on every line item for attorneys? What are our permits and fees for the project? What are our financing costs from the project? From interest to loan origination fees they even do their own plan reviews and things like that. We have lenders, inspectors, so then I think we went through a lot of those line items maybe in one of our previous podcasts,
Yes.
but this is where we're kind of building that out. We're getting proposals from different consultants and engineers throughout this time frame. This is when we're having detailed conversations with banks to make sure that, hey, like before I close on this, I want to make sure that with the world as it is today, that we can get debt and equity financing for this project when it goes vertical. And then the last one is to help, you go find investors to partner with us to, actually buy the land and then go through kind of the whole pre-development process at that point in time. So this is literally, we haven't even bought the land yet. And this is what we go through. So then once you buy the land, then you have another 12 months after this. So, but I would say in today's environment, when the market was really, really hot, we were having to go through this process and buy the land, go non-refundable, buy the land before we really knew what we could build. That environment's changed a lot today, right? So in today's environment, chances are pretty high that you can do a lot of your entitlement work, working with the city and different agencies and things, getting it to a point where you can pull permits and have an approved SDP. Before, you were doing that after you bought the land. Now, land sellers don't have the leverage, and ultimately, you can push that process out. So yes, you are spending cost to get it to that point in time, but the biggest cost in pre-development is your land purchase. So we're in today's environment, I'd say you're able to push that land purchase out further.
Okay, so the pendulum has swung back to where it's more favorable to the buyer.
Yep, that's correct. Yep. So then your path to closing, right? So due diligence is done now. You want to hire your team, get your team ready to go.
So things like officially engage them.
Yep, officially engage them, sign the contracts, so that when you close on that property, you can hit the ground running and move forward very quickly. Time kills everything. The more time it takes, the more expensive it ultimately is typically. This is also when we put together our partnership documents for our investors. So our attorneys are putting those together, and outlining, what does this investment look like from an investor's perspective. Then we'll do a capital call. So capital call is, all right, Chris, you said you want to invest $100,000 in this deal. All right, so here are your documents. Please review those, and then we'll call. You committed $100,000. Here's that capital call, and for $100,000, and then here are the wire instructions on where to send that money.
What's your percent of like, hey, you get, say you have for simple numbers, 10 investors saying they want to invest $100,000. Say, hey, cool, I want to do it. What percent drop off from that verbal commit to actually signing and funding?
I think I would say we're high 90s for sure. I don't know if
10%.
Way less than 10%.
Or dropping off.
Yeah,
okay.
I would say way less. I'd say way less than that.
Because I imagine that's got to be one of the things you're balancing there. As well.
Yeah,
that's just another detail to figure out.
It's another detail to figure out for sure. But yeah, we've got a great group of investors that we've worked with. I don't know if I'm trying to think of anyone. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. I'm sure we have a couple, but nothing's coming to mind right now.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. And then the last thing is you want to get insurance in place. A lot of people kind of forget about that, but even if you are buying a vacant piece of land, and sometimes we prefer to buy, operating buildings that will be torn down later, but we also buy just like vacant raw dirt.
So even with this vacant dirt, you gotta have insurance.
Gotta have insurance. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Just your liability there, right? Someone wanders onto your site and gets hurt. You don't want to be covered and not get sued.
That makes sense.
So after that, then you close the deal. So that's
simple, huh?
That's simple. Now we actually start designing and all that stuff. So
okay, so you close the deal, and this is where you kind of start in the phase one horizontal work.
No, I mean we have another 12 months of just literally going through the design and submitting documents to the city and working with general contractors to continue to hone in. That's when you get into the real details. And we had a project that was 78 units over by 9th of Colorado. It took us 28 months from this process. We just finished this. We bought the land. 28 months later, we had our approvals to start building.
Wow. Well, this has been awesome. I've learned a lot, Adam, and I'm hoping in the future we can drill down some of these topics,
Yeah.
but also maybe do some more educational podcasts on, hey, you close that next phase.
Yep.
Because I found the way you laid it out extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And logical. So I appreciate it. And I'm glad you have the knowledge and also like the excitement to teach and educate.
Yeah, for sure.
Because this is stuff that
there's a lot that goes behind. There's a lot that goes on behind closed doors, right? Like a lot of people just they see the 1% finished product, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much work from a lot of different team members that goes into it to get to that point in time.
Well, listeners out there, if you guys want more of this type of content, let me and Adam know, because obviously Adam loves teaching. He's knowledgeable. I love learning myself. We do have some plans to walk some properties, some of these sites, where it's feasible in construction and due diligence and control the property, all that. So if you are local in Colorado or flying into town, let us know. We can coordinate one of the times we're walking properties. But this has been so much fun.
Yeah,
thank you
awesome.
so much.
Hey, thank you.
We will see you on a future episode to either talk about a deal or dive into more educational stuff.
That sounds great.
Bye, everyone.
Right.